January 1913. Before dawn. Above the tree line where maps turn vague and weather becomes law. By every known rule of survival, no one should have been moving in the mountains that morning. The barometer had collapsed overnight. Snow fell not in flakes but in sheets, driven sideways by a wind strong enough to sand flesh from bone. Visibility was measured in steps, not yards. Logic dictated delay. Experience demanded retreat. And yet, at precisely 4:20, the rescue unit was ordered to prepare for ascent. History insists this is where the story should have ended, on paper, with a red stamp marked mission postponed. Instead, it began with 6 men tightening straps in a canvas shelter while the mountains listened. The official reason was simple. 3 surveyors had failed to return from a high pass used only in summer. Their last transmission had arrived just before the storm sealed the valley. The message itself was short, broken, and badly keyed. But it was not the weather that unsettled the telegraph operator. It was the tone. He later described it as urgent without direction, as if the sender no longer understood where he was, only that something had gone wrong. No rational commander would have attempted a recovery under those conditions. The avalanche risk alone was catastrophic. But the region had a reputation. Disappearances that could not be explained, trails that led nowhere, equipment found miles from any plausible route. Officials dismissed these as superstition layered over bad navigation. Still, the files were thicker than they should have been. The unit selected was small by necessity. 6 men. Any more would have slowed movement through narrow passes. Any fewer would have guaranteed failure. They were not soldiers, but they were trained like them. Alpine climbers hardened by altitude, medics accustomed to amputations performed in snowdrifts, men who understood that mountains do not negotiate. Even so, something was different that morning. Veterans later wrote that no one spoke above a whisper. Not because of discipline, but because sound felt inappropriate, like noise in a cathedral. The storm muted everything, compressing the world into a white corridor where distance and depth dissolved. Packs were checked twice. Rifles were carried not for animals. There were none moving in that weather, but because being unarmed felt wrong. They departed before first light, moving single file into timber that creaked and bent under ice. Every step forward erased the last. Navigation depended on memory and instinct. The trail markers vanished within minutes. By the time the camp disappeared behind them, retreat was already theoretical. The climb was brutal but predictable at first. Wind shear at the ridgeline, ice forming inside beards and collars, fingers numbing so quickly that buckles had to be managed with teeth. These were known enemies, familiar ones. What unsettled them was the silence beneath the storm. Forests in winter still make noise. Branches snapping, animals shifting, snow settling. Here there was nothing. No birds, no small movement. Just the wind above and their own breathing inside wool and canvas. It created the sensation of intrusion, as if they were crossing into territory that did not expect company. At 9:10 they found the first anomaly. A length of rope lay half-buried near a stand of twisted pines, its fibers frayed not by cutting, but by tension applied unevenly. It had been pulled apart. Nearby, a snowshoe sat upright, its leather bindings torn free. There were no drag marks, no blood, no signs of struggle that made sense. By every known rule of accident analysis, this was wrong. Men do not abandon equipment in storms unless forced. Animals do not remove it cleanly. Avalanches scatter debris downslope. This was arranged, left where it could be seen. The commander ordered a brief halt. Time was bleeding away, but uncertainty was worse. They spread out just far enough to scan the tree line. That was when one of the medics noticed the tracks. They were not human. They were not animal. Too long for a man. Too narrow for a bear. Spaced with a stride that implied speed on uneven ground. Speed no wounded or panicked person could achieve. The impressions sank deep into compacted snow, as if made by something heavier than it appeared. No one said what they were thinking, saying it would have given it shape. They continued upward. By midday, the storm eased. Not ended, but thinned, like a curtain drawn back just enough to reveal depth. The pass ahead emerged in fragments. Black stone ribs, ice-choked gullies, a cave mouth visible only because the snow refused to settle inside it. That cave was not on any survey map. According to the missing men's planned route, they should never have been there. The cave sat above the safe line, carved into a face locals avoided even in summer. Yet leading toward it were broken branches, disturbed snow, and those same impossible tracks, now more frequent, circling, overlapping. By every known rule of probability, coincidence had expired. The temperature dropped sharply as they approached, the cold deepening in a way that had nothing to do with altitude. Breath fogged instantly. Metal burned skin through gloves. One man later wrote that it felt like stepping into shade cast by something vast. At the entrance, the smell reached them. Not decay in the ordinary sense. Not the clean rot of animals claimed by winter. This was older, sharper, threaded with iron. The kind of smell that suggests time spent underground, time measured in years. The commander hesitated. This mattered. Decisions in the field ripple forward. Had he ordered withdrawal then, the incident would have ended as another unanswered disappearance. Files closed. Questions filed away. Instead, he made the only choice that felt acceptable to a man responsible for others. He ordered them inside. Lantern light failed immediately, swallowed by stone that did not reflect. The cave sloped downward, its walls marked by deep grooves that looked at first like erosion, until the angles repeated. Too regular. Too intentional. 10 meters in, they found the body. One of the surveyors lay on his side, frozen in motion, fingers curled as if clutching air. His eyes were open. His mouth was not. The jaw had been forced shut so hard that teeth cracked. His coat was intact. His skin was not. This was not exposure. This was not an accident. The medic began to kneel. The commander stopped him, because from deeper in the cave came a sound that did not belong to stone or wind. It was slow, wet, deliberate. Something shifted its weight in the dark. At that exact moment, before panic, before shouting, before flight, every man in that cave understood the same impossible truth. They were no longer searching for the missing. They had been found. January 1913. Midday, though light meant nothing underground. By every known rule of field recovery, the moment a living presence is detected, the mission changes. Rescue becomes reconnaissance. Reconnaissance becomes withdrawal. That is how men survive long enough to report what they have seen. But history records no such transition here. The sound from deeper in the cave came again, closer this time. Not louder, not faster, just nearer, as if distance itself were being consumed. Lantern flames trembled, not from wind, but from air that felt disturbed, displaced by mass moving slowly through confined space. No rational commander would have advanced, and yet retreat felt impossible. Behind them, the cave mouth no longer looked like an exit. Snow had begun to slide inward, whispering down the rock face in soft collapses. Enough to block light, enough to erase certainty. Even if they turned now, climbing back into the storm with a wounded man and failing visibility bordered on suicide. The commander made a decision that would later be debated by men who had never felt a mountain close its hand around them. They moved forward. Each step inside the cave amplified sensation. Sound behaved incorrectly, bending and returning seconds late. The air grew heavier, metallic, laced with the unmistakable smell of old smoke, as if fires had once burned here and left something unfinished. The walls narrowed, then widened again into a chamber whose ceiling vanished beyond the reach of lantern light. That was where they found the second body. He was not positioned like the first. He had been placed, laid against the stone, legs extended, arms folded inward unnaturally. His chest cavity was open, not ripped apart, but parted with force applied at specific points. Ribs fractured cleanly, organs gone, not scattered, removed. By every known rule of violence, this was deliberate. The medic whispered a prayer without realizing he had done it. The sound seemed to sink into the stone rather than echo. Several men later said the cave felt as though it were listening. That was when one of the climbers noticed the markings. They covered the walls at shoulder height and above, long parallel grooves etched into rock that had resisted erosion for centuries. They were not random. They repeated in spirals, in arcs, sometimes stopping abruptly, sometimes crossing older sets. Whatever had made them had returned here many times. This was not a lair created by necessity. This was a place of use. The commander ordered weapons ready, not aimed, not raised, but present. The rifles felt absurdly small, thin, insufficient. By every known rule of combat, they were holding tools designed for prey while standing inside the territory of something that did not behave like one. The sound returned. This time it came from above. Stone scraped stone. Not falling rock, but weight being shifted. Something repositioning itself with care. Lanterns lifted instinctively, beams shaking as they searched the ceiling. For a fraction of a second, one beam caught movement, pale against dark stone. Then nothing. That glimpse was enough. It was tall. Too tall. Its proportions wrong, elongated as if shaped by starvation rather than growth. Limbs folded in on themselves at angles joints should not allow. It clung to the ceiling with points of contact that did not match hands or feet. No one fired. Not because they lacked courage, but because the human mind hesitates when it encounters something that does not fit any category it knows how to fight. The commander began issuing orders, quiet, clipped, precise, when the first rock fell. It struck one of the climbers across the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Pain echoed louder than gunfire would have. That sound broke the spell. The thing moved. It did not drop. It unfolded. The descent was silent until impact, and when it landed between them and the cave mouth, the stone floor shuddered as if struck by a heavy machine. Lantern light washed over it in pieces, never fully revealing the whole shape at once. Skin stretched tight over bone, too tight, as if whatever lived inside it was larger than the body containing it. The face, if it could be called that, was narrow, hollow-cheeked, mouth pulled into an expression that suggested neither rage nor hunger, but expectation. Its eyes reflected light without shining. Black, intelligent, focused. By every known rule of fear response, panic should have exploded. Instead, there was stillness. The creature stood upright, towering, its presence compressing the space around it. When it inhaled, the sound was wrong, irregular, uneven, as though breathing were a learned behavior it no longer needed but still practiced. Then it spoke. Not loudly, not theatrically. One word. Low, wet, shaped carefully. The men did not need a translator to understand that it was naming itself. That was the moment when history insists discipline collapses. A rifle fired. The shot cracked through the cave like lightning. The bullet struck the creature's upper torso, and did nothing. No flinch. No recoil. It turned its head slowly toward the shooter, eyes fixing on him with something that was unmistakably evaluative. Not anger. Assessment. By every known rule of warfare, this was the instant where retreat becomes chaos. And chaos is death. The commander shouted to fall back, to regroup, to maintain spacing. His voice sounded thin, fragile, swallowed by stone that favored the other thing in the cave. The creature moved. Not fast at first. Just enough to demonstrate that distance meant nothing. One long step, then another. Its feet pressed into rock with a sound like something heavy being peeled away. The shooter tried to fire again. He never finished the motion. The creature crossed the space between them with speed that did not match its size, seized him, and lifted him off the ground with one arm. The man screamed once. The sound ended abruptly, replaced by a wet impact as his body struck the wall. Bone does not make that sound unless it stops being bone. The remaining men opened fire. Muzzle flashes filled the chamber, strobing the walls, freezing impossible shapes into fragments of light. Bullets struck stone. Some struck flesh. None slowed it. The creature did not charge them. It advanced, slow, certain, as if it knew the cave itself would finish what it started. Then the ground shook. Not from gunfire. From above. Stone cracked. Dust rained down. With a deep, grinding sound, Part of the ceiling near the entrance collapsed inward, sealing the way they had come with tons of rock and ice. The cave had closed. The commander looked back once, then forward. By every known rule of survival, they were already dead. And yet, the creature did not attack again. It waited, standing between them and escape, head tilted, listening not to sound but to fear. That was when the men realized something far worse than entrapment. This was not a hunt. It was a selection. January 1913. No measurable time underground. Only sequence. By every known rule of entrapment, panic should have shattered what remained of their cohesion. Men sealed inside stone with a superior force do not think tactically. They scatter. They beg. They die quickly. That did not happen. The creature stepped aside. Not far. Just enough. The path deeper into the cave opened like a deliberate invitation. That was the first unmistakable sign that this was not a cornered animal reacting to threat. Predators block exits. Traps open paths. And the difference between the two is intelligence. The commander understood this immediately. He had spent years reading terrain under fire, watching enemies shape the battlefield before striking. And now the battlefield was shaping itself. He ordered them to move, not because it was safe, but because standing still had become the most dangerous option. They advanced along the cavern wall, weapons trained, boots scraping stone dust that had not been disturbed in decades. The wounded climber was dragged between them, breath ragged, shoulder already swelling beneath torn fabric. Every sound felt amplified, as though the cave were magnifying weakness. Behind them, the creature followed. Not close enough to strike, not far enough to escape. Its footsteps were irregular, sometimes delayed, sometimes overlapping, creating the illusion that there was more than one of it moving in the dark. By every known rule of perception, the human brain fills silence with threat. Here, the silence was being curated. They entered a wider chamber. Lantern light spread farther here, revealing walls that curved inward like ribs. The stone was darker, stained in places where something had seeped into it and never left. And embedded in those walls, half fused with rock, were shapes that did not belong. Hands, faces, fragments of men, not remains left behind by collapse or accident, but bodies claimed slowly, pressed into the stone as if the mountain itself had softened around them. Clothing styles varied: wool coats, canvas gear, leather straps cracked by age. Some were recent. Others were old enough that insignia had faded into colorless dust. By every known rule of time, this place had been used for generations. One of the medics began to sob. Quietly, involuntarily. The sound did not echo. It was absorbed like moisture into soil. The creature made a sound then. Not a roar. Not a growl. A low rasp that rose and fell in a rhythm disturbingly close to amusement. It began to circle them, forcing rotation, forcing constant adjustment. Rifles swung. Lanterns jerked. Shadows twisted and overlapped until no one could tell which belonged to stone and which belonged to it. Then it struck. Not at the armed men. At the wounded. It seized the climber with one hand, lifting him effortlessly, his legs kicking uselessly in the air. The man screamed, not in pain, but in recognition, as if something about the creature's proximity unlocked an understanding he had been avoiding. The creature leaned in close. His mouth moved. No one else heard the words. But whatever was said drained the man's resistance completely. His body went slack before the killing blow came. When the creature hurled him against the wall, the impact shattered him in a spray that painted the stone red and darkened instantly in the cold air. That was the moment something broke in the others. Not courage. Hope. The commander spotted it then. A narrow fissure in the chamber wall, half hidden behind a column of stone. A passage barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. He shouted for movement. They ran. The creature followed immediately, this time with purpose. Its limbs slammed into the ground as it closed the distance, no longer content to observe. The men threw themselves into the fissure one by one, packs scraping, rifles clattering uselessly against stone. The narrator, later the sole survivor, felt claws rake across his back as he entered, tearing fabric, biting flesh. Pain flared white-hot, then vanished beneath terror. The tunnel narrowed. Breath became work. Shoulders scraped rock. Lantern light jittered, then dimmed as oxygen thinned. Behind them, the sound of the creature crawling was not frantic. It was patient. Stone groaned as its mass adjusted to the confined space. The scrape of its movement was slow, deliberate, inevitable. It knew they could not turn. It knew they could not fight. That was when it began to whisper, not aloud, inside their heads. Names, one by one. Each time it spoke a name, the man carrying it stiffened as though struck. Because there is a specific terror reserved for the moment when something that should not know you demonstrates that it does. The man at the rear began to panic. His breathing turned erratic. His boots slipped, and then the pressure came from behind. A hand closed around his ankle. There was no scream this time, just a sudden, wet pull, followed by the sound of fabric tearing and a brief, muffled struggle that ended too quickly to be mercy. No one turned back. They kept moving because the tunnel allowed nothing else. They emerged into a pocket chamber where the ceiling rose just enough to crouch. Lantern light steadied, revealing a space shaped like a throat opening into lungs. The floor was littered with bones arranged in careful piles. Gear hung from cracks like offerings, helmets, buckles, tags. One man recognized a symbol on a rusted belt clasp. It belonged to a rescue unit that had vanished decades earlier. This was not feeding. This was collecting. Cold air poured down from a vertical crack at the back of the chamber, clean air. Night air. Freedom. They climbed. Hands searched for holds. Muscles screamed. Blood smeared stone. Below them, the creature entered the chamber and stopped. It did not rush. It inhaled, as if savoring. The man below the narrator slipped. His boot lost purchase. He fell, snapping his ankle on impact. The sound echoed like a signal flare. The creature moved. The narrator forced himself upward, not looking back. He heard the creature reach down, not grabbing the fallen man roughly, but lifting him by the face, as one might lift something fragile. Then came the sound. Not violence. Feeding. Slow. Wet. Unhurried. They climbed until their hands went numb and their lungs burned. At last, the crack widened and spilled them out onto a ledge dusted with fresh snow. The open night hit them like rebirth. Only 3 men remained. The storm had passed. The air was clear. Stars burned cold above jagged ridgelines. For one impossible moment it felt like survival. Then the commander counted, and his face told the truth before his words could. They were not escaping. They were being released. January 1913. Night again. Clear. Cold. Watching. By every known rule of pursuit, a predator that loses its prey at the edge of open terrain accelerates. It closes distance before confusion becomes advantage. That did not happen here. The mountain was quiet. Too quiet. The 3 surviving men stood on the exposed ledge, lungs burning, hearts hammering, waiting for the impact that did not come. Below them, the cave mouth was a black scar in the stone. Nothing moved. Nothing followed. That was when the commander realized the most dangerous possibility. They had not escaped. They had been allowed out. He ordered them along the ridgeline toward the saddle that led back to the valley. It was the only route that did not require descending into avalanche paths or climbing blind faces in darkness. On paper, it was the safest option. On paper, they moved single file, boots biting into crusted snow, rifles up though none of them believed the weapons mattered anymore. Every step felt measured not by distance but by permission. Halfway across the slope, the narrator noticed the tracks. Long, narrow, deep, ahead of them, not behind. They did not lead from the cave. They crossed the slope hours old, partially filled with wind-blown snow. The spacing implied unhurried movement, confidence. The creature had been outside before them. The realization hit like a physical blow. The tunnels, the chamber, the vertical crack. None of it had been improvisation. This route had been used before, repeatedly. They were not the first group to believe they had found a way out. They were walking a path. One of the medics, face pale, eyes glassy, began to recite facts under his breath. Unit number, date, names of towns in the valley, a catalogue of reality, spoken like a charm against madness. His voice shook, fractured by the understanding that facts do not stop things that do not obey them. They reached the saddle just before midnight. Wind tunneled through the gap, moaning low and constant, a sound uncomfortably similar to breathing. The terrain forced them into single file again, stone walls closing in on either side. The open sky meant nothing when the ground itself narrowed choice. That was when they found the body. Half buried beneath a thin crust of snow lay what remained of the third surveyor. Not torn apart, not scattered, arranged, limbs positioned with care. Head turned slightly to one side, eyes closed. Beside him, carved into the snow and rock with deep, deliberate strokes, was the same spiral they had seen in the cave. A symbol repeated until meaning became inevitable. This was not a kill site. It was a message. The commander muttered that it was a warning. But the narrator understood something worse. The arrangement was too precise, too ceremonial. It was a marker. The wind died abruptly, not gradually, not naturally. Silence fell like a held breath. The narrator felt it before he saw it. The pressure behind the eyes, the sensation of being measured from above. He looked up. On the rock ledge overlooking the saddle, a shape unfolded from shadow. It stood upright, tall and still, outlined by moonlight. From this distance, it could have been mistaken for a dead tree or a broken pillar of stone. But then it moved just enough. The creature had been waiting. It did not rush. It did not descend immediately. It looked down at them with the calm patience of something that had already accounted for every direction they could run. When it spoke, the voice carried easily on the cold air. Soft, certain, an invitation. The narrator's body reacted before his mind could. Muscles tensed. Breath caught. That word, the same one spoken in the cave, landed in his chest like a command his instincts understood even if his thoughts refused it. The commander fired. The shot cracked across the mountains, echoing through stone and ice. The bullet passed through empty space. The creature had shifted just enough to let it miss. Not dodging, demonstrating. Then it stepped down from the ledge. It did not jump. It descended in a sequence of movements that ignored gravity, limbs bending and unfolding as if the mountain itself were assisting. Wherever it touched the stone, the surface darkened, as though warmth or moisture lingered. They backed away, rifles shaking, boots slipping on loose snow. The medic began to pray aloud. Words tumbled out of him in fragments, desperate and unstructured. The creature tilted its head. It was not listening to the prayer. It was listening to the fear beneath it. Without warning, it surged forward. Distance collapsed. In an instant, it had seized the medic by the chest and lifted him into the air. His prayer shattered into a scream that echoed across the saddle. But the creature did not kill him. It brought its face close to his. His mouth moved slowly. The medic's eyes changed. Terror drained away, replaced by something far worse, understanding. As if he were being shown not his death, but his place within something much larger and far older. Then the creature dropped him. The fall should have killed him. It did not. He lay broken in the snow, gasping, staring at the sky as though it were unfamiliar. When the narrator ran to him, against the commander's shout, the medic grabbed his sleeve with surprising strength. "It knows," he whispered. "It knows where we're going." Before anything else could be said, the creature stepped over the medic's body and continued forward, unhurried, patient, inevitable. They ran. Not in formation, not with orders. They scattered. Predators understand that moment. When discipline collapses and distance becomes instinct. The narrator followed the commander along a narrow ridge, the drop on either side vanishing into darkness. Every step felt like a wager between falling to death or slowing just enough to be caught. Behind them, the creature moved. Not fast, certain. And sometimes, just sometimes, the narrator thought he heard more than one set of steps, as though the mountain itself were echoing its presence. They reached a crevice cutting down through the ridge like a wound. The commander slid into it, signaling for him to follow. As the narrator dropped in, he felt vibration through the rock. The creature had chosen this path for them, because it always chose the path. January 1913. Somewhere below the ridgeline. Time no longer behaved normally. The crevice swallowed them. Rock walls pressed close, slick with frost and something darker that caught lantern light in dull streaks. The air inside was warmer than it should have been. Stale, heavy, breathed too many times by things that did not leave. The commander slid to a stop first, boots striking stone. He turned, reaching up to steady the narrator as he dropped beside him. Above them, the opening narrowed to a jagged slit of stars. The vibration came again. Not footsteps, breathing, deep, resonant, felt through the ribs more than heard. The commander motioned for silence and pointed down the crevice. It widened ahead, sloping gently into a natural corridor that disappeared into shadow. They had a choice only in theory. Going back up meant exposure. Standing still meant certainty. They moved forward. The walls changed as they descended. Less fractured, more worn. Stone smoothed by contact, as if something large passed through here often enough to leave memory in the rock. Embedded along the sides were objects half-fused into the surface. Buckles, rifle barrels bent like soft metal, scraps of fabric petrified into the stone. Markers. The narrator noticed then that the spiral symbol appeared again. Not carved, but naturally formed. Veins of darker mineral curling inward in the same unmistakable shape. Too consistent to be coincidence. The corridor opened into a vast hollow. Lantern light revealed a chamber so large its ceiling vanished into darkness. The floor dipped toward a central depression, where a pool of black water lay perfectly still. No ripples, no reflection. It absorbed light instead of returning it. The commander stopped abruptly. At the edge of the pool stood figures, human in outline, wrong in posture. They were not alive in any way the narrator understood. Bodies stood upright, skin gray and tight, eyes open but empty, faces frozen mid-expression. Fear, awe, submission. Their feet merged seamlessly with the stone floor, as though they were growing out of it. Dozens of them, maybe more. Each wore remnants of clothing from different decades. Military, civilian, survey gear, cold-weather uniforms that no longer existed outside museums. This was not a grave. It was a roster. The commander whispered something under his breath. Names of missing expeditions, disasters written off as avalanches or exposure. Here was the common denominator no report had ever found. The water stirred. A single ripple moved across the surface of the pool, slow and deliberate, as if something had shifted beneath it. The creature emerged, not climbing, not rising, unfolding. Its full height became visible for the first time, and the narrator understood why distance had been maintained before. Up close, it was not simply large, it was disproportionate. Limbs extended farther than anatomy should allow. Joints bent in directions that implied adaptation rather than injury. Its surface was not furred or scaled, but textured, like stone warmed just enough to breathe. Patterns moved faintly beneath it, the same spirals repeating, rearranging. The creature stopped at the edge of the pool. It addressed them. This time there was no attempt at secrecy, no whispering inside the skull. The voice resonated through the chamber, vibrating the water, the stone. The bodies fused into the walls. It spoke in their language, broken, old, learned slowly. It did not threaten. It explained, not with history, but with inevitability. The mountain was not empty. It had never been empty. It was a convergence, pressure, stone, time, and something that had learned to think long before humans learned to name fear. The creature was not alone, but it was the interface, the shepherd. Those who entered the mountain did not trespass by accident. They were drawn by curiosity, by ambition, by the human habit of believing unexplored means unclaimed. Most were taken. A few were chosen. The figures around the pool were not dead. They were bound. Anchors. Each one a living seal that held something deeper, something vast and patient, asleep beneath layers of stone and ice. The creature tended them, replaced them, collected more when the mountain demanded reinforcement. The commander listened without interruption. When the explanation ended, he raised his rifle, not in attack but in refusal. "We won't," he said. His voice was steady, defiant in a way that surprised the narrator. The creature regarded him for a long moment. Then it did something unexpected. It gestured toward the narrator. Not as prey, as alternative. The understanding arrived instantly and completely, bypassing panic. One of them would leave. One of them would stay. Not die. Remain. The commander turned slowly, eyes searching the narrator's face. Not for permission, but for confirmation of what he already knew. He had led men into danger his entire career. This was simply the final accounting. He shook his head once. "No," he said. The creature did not argue. It reached out. Stone moved. The floor beneath the commander's feet softened, flowing upward like wet clay, locking his boots, then his legs, then his torso in place. He did not scream. He did not struggle. He met the narrator's eyes. "Go," he said. "Remember." The narrator was pulled backward, not roughly but firmly, toward a tunnel he had not noticed opening behind him. As he was dragged away, he saw the commander's face still visible, still calm, as the stone rose around him. Not killing, preserving. The last thing the narrator heard before the tunnel closed was the creature's voice. No longer monstrous, no longer alien. Almost gentle. Balance is maintained. Darkness swallowed him, and the mountain sealed itself again. March, 1913. A village at the edge of the world. The narrator was found half-frozen near a timber outpost 2 weeks after the expedition was declared lost. His clothing was torn, his back scarred with wounds that never healed cleanly, and his eyes had taken on a fixed, distant quality that doctors would later describe as permanent shock. He never spoke of the mountain at first, not because he could not, but because language resisted what it had never been built to carry. When he did begin to talk, it was not to officials. It was to paper. At night, under lamplight, he wrote obsessively. Dates, distances, shapes, symbols. He sketched the spiral again and again until the paper tore beneath the pressure of his pencil. He mapped tunnels he should not have remembered and chambers no human should have seen. The reports were dismissed. Avalanche trauma, survivor's guilt, hallucinations induced by hypothermia and altitude. The official record listed the expedition as a structural collapse followed by exposure. No bodies recovered, no anomalies confirmed. But the narrator did not stop. He noticed patterns. Whenever a new mining claim was filed within 20 miles of the ridge, accidents followed. Collapses without seismic cause. Equipment failures that made no mechanical sense. Workers who vanished briefly and returned changed. Quiet, obedient, unwilling to go near certain tunnels. And always somewhere near the incident the spiral appeared. Carved into rock. Burned into timber. Etched faintly into metal tools as if by pressure rather than hand. Years passed. The scars on his back never faded. In cold weather, they burned, tracing paths beneath his skin that matched the tunnels he had escaped. Sometimes, in deep winter, he could feel breathing through the ground, slow and vast, like the mountain dreaming. He never returned to that range. But he watched it, through reports, through maps, through the careful absence of development where progress should have gone. Whole sections of the range were quietly avoided, labeled unstable, cursed by rumor, economically unviable. The mountain had learned to protect itself without revealing the reason. In 1936, a survey team attempted to reopen the route near the saddle. They found nothing unusual. No cave entrance. No markings. Just stone and snow and silence. But one man went missing. His body was discovered weeks later at the edge of the valley, carefully arranged, eyes closed, hands folded. No sign of trauma. No explanation. On the inside of his jacket, pressed into the lining as if imprinted by heat and pressure, was a faint spiral. The narrator died in 1941. Among his belongings was a sealed envelope marked only with coordinates and a warning written in an unsteady hand. Do not map what listens. The envelope was never opened. The coordinates were never published. They still exist. And so does the mountain, because the agreement was never broken. It was only renewed.